Berlin, and today, of course, Politico is reporting from here, from Brasília, as part of our Road to COP30 event series. Now, I don't need to tell the people in this room that the decisions made here in Brasília have global implications. Brazil is the 10th largest economy in the world by GDP. It is a major exporter of soybeans, crude petroleum, sugar, and corn. It's home to one of the world's largest carbon sinks, the Amazon rainforest. And when it comes to energy and climate policy, Brazil is a trendsetter across South America and indeed around the globe. That's what makes this program so important. Brazil is running one of the world's largest real-time experiments in whether countries can pursue aggressive climate goals without destabilizing food security. Today, more of Brazil's corn and sugarcane harvests are being used to produce ethanol, and farmers and scientists are trying to innovate by maximizing land use opportunities and exploring native feedstocks like macuba. But there are challenges to overcome. Some environmentalists have concerns about the impact of biofuel production on the climate, and others worry that Brazil's biofuel strategy could harm global food access. Today, we'll talk all about these challenges and about the great opportunities. To begin our program with a few words from our partner, I'm pleased to introduce Francila Calica, the Vice President for Agricultural Affairs and Sustainability at Bayer Crop Science Latin America.
Thank you, Steve. Boa noite. É um grande prazer estar aqui com todos vocês. Muito obrigada por terem aceito o nosso convite nessa noite fresca do verão. Verão? Não sei. Do Cerrado. Já é primavera, já é primavera. Melhor época do ano, né, gente? Falta um pouquinho de chuva, mas é uma época linda. Muito obrigada pela presença de todos. É uma satisfação estar aqui falando nessa reta final de COP30. Estava conversando com colegas aqui na entrada. Está todo mundo respirando COP30, todo mundo sonhando para chegar Natal, mas alegre de que COP30 está bem ali, todo mundo bastante atarefado. COP30 volta para o Brasil, um lugar onde a gente começou toda essa discussão sobre mudanças climáticas, desde a Eco 92. De lá para cá, o Brasil ele se tornou uma potência agrícola, um dos maiores exportadores de alimentos do mundo, um dos maiores exportadores e produtores de commodities do mundo, e também se tornou uma referência em agricultura sustentável. Essa jornada que o Brasil cumpriu desde 92, desde a Eco 92, também serve de exemplo para boa parte do mundo. Uma pesquisa que a Bayer conduziu em parceria com um instituto chamado Kainetec nos mostrou que o agricultor brasileiro, os agricultores brasileiros são super abertos às práticas sustentáveis, às práticas de agricultura regenerativa. Os produtores, no geral, utilizam 10 práticas de agricultura regenerativa no seu dia a dia nas propriedades, enquanto a média global de uso de práticas de agricultura regenerativa fica na casa dos 7%. Esses produtores também que foram escutados, e foi uma pesquisa que foi rodada em 8 países do mundo, eles também mostram que se preocupam muito com o que está acontecendo em relação a mudanças climáticas. Boa parte desses agricultores, 75% deles, nessa pesquisa, relataram que já foram impactados nos últimos 3 anos por eventos climáticos extremos. Lembrando que esses agricultores são extremamente experimentados, têm bastante tempo de prática agrícola, e eles têm visto e têm sido impactados por mudanças climáticas cada vez mais complexas e por eventos extremos cada vez mais complexos nos tempos recentes. Mas, ao mesmo tempo que esse agricultor também vê que essa mudança climática tem impactado sua rentabilidade, ele também corre à frente do tempo para adotar práticas sustentáveis e de agricultura regenerativa que trazem mais segurança para que ele possa conseguir e para que ele possa continuar produzindo alimentos de uma forma mais segura. É o que a gente tem visto. E entre esses 8 países onde essa pesquisa rodou, o Brasil, os agricultores brasileiros saem na frente com essa preocupação com as mudanças climáticas, mas também com essa preocupação de adoção de práticas sustentáveis e de agricultura regenerativa. Esse é um dos exemplos e dos aprendizados que o Brasil pode mostrar nessa COP30 para o mundo. A gente também aqui tem, no Brasil, a grande discussão sobre quem vai, no mundo, ter condições de oferecer alimento na medida que se precisa, para a quantidade de população que a gente vai ter no mundo, mas também vai oferecer uma transição energética sustentável. E se tem um país que está habilitado e é front-runner nessa história toda de transição energética e produção de alimentos, é o Brasil. A gente consegue produzir alimento com sustentabilidade, na quantidade com que se demanda, mas a gente também consegue promover uma transição energética sustentável. Lembrando que a nossa base da transição energética ela vem da agricultura. Podemos falar do etanol de cana-de-açúcar, que já está aí, dos programas super bem estabelecidos em relação à transição energética desde a época do pró-álcool, e os avanços dessa discussão sobre transição energética que vai passar obrigatoriamente pelo etanol de milho. Daniel da Abramilho está aqui, conhece muito bem essa história. Mais uma vez, a agricultura brasileira dando lição ao mundo de como produzir alimentos e fazer transição energética sustentável. As oportunidades são inúmeras nessa discussão da transição energética. As bases já estão colocadas. O Brasil está ali na melhor posição do mundo para que a gente rode isso. Basta a gente, como setor, se organizar, se unir, tratar dos temas que ainda são necessários, temas infraestruturais, para que o país tenha condição de seguir, para que a gente possa aproveitar todas as oportunidades dessa discussão. Para quem estará na COP30 aqui daqui a algumas semanas, a Bayer tem, há um bom tempo, tratado muito dessa discussão de descarbonização das cadeias. A gente tem, dentro da companhia, um programa muito bem estruturado de quase 5 anos para descarbonizar a agricultura brasileira, as principais cadeias, soja, milho e algodão, um programa chamado Procarbono, e é uma das iniciativas que a gente vai apresentar na COP30. Quem estiver por lá, a gente gostaria de fazer um grande convite. Nós temos uma Casa Bayer, que é uma parceria com uma entidade de terceiro setor local de Belém, em que a gente restaurou um casarão histórico no centro de Belém e está apoiando todo um projeto social de formação de jovens estudantes e jovens profissionais. E a gente vai ter uma série de eventos na Casa Bayer, e seria um grande prazer contar com a presença de vocês. Se estiverem por lá e puderem, óbvio, se as agendas permitirem. É um grande prazer a gente fazer esse evento aqui, em parceria com o POLITICO, mas também em parceria com o ICA, que é um parceiro histórico em várias frentes de ação. E espero que vocês gostem da discussão que a gente vai fazer aqui e aproveitem esse evento, que é mais um evento da Jornada COP. Muito obrigada.
Thank you, Francila, and thank you to Bayer for supporting today's program. I'd like next to welcome to the stage our host this evening, Gabriel Delgado, the High Representative at the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture in Brazil.
Obrigado, Steve. Obrigado, Francila. Eu vou falar em portunhol, que é minha língua universal. Quando falo espanhol, às vezes eu falo também algumas palavras em português agora. Bem-vindos, bem-vindas à Casa da Agricultura das Américas. É um prazer para nós, a escolha de Bayer, de fazer este evento aqui, na Casa da Agricultura das Américas. Nós temos um compromisso muito forte com os sistemas alimentares de nosso continente. Temos certeza de que nossos sistemas alimentares têm muita coisa por melhorar, mas temos certeza também que eles são muito eficientes e são parte da solução dos problemas climáticos. Acho que às vezes, eu sou produtor rural na Argentina, né? E às vezes a gente fala muito das coisas que nós temos que melhorar, que é verdade, né? Temos muito por fazer, mas temos muito caminho feito também, né? E essa COP aqui no Brasil é uma mostra muito importante de um logro, acho um objetivo muito importante que cumpriu o agro de nosso continente, na cabeça de Brasil. Mas é a primeira COP, pois as últimas 3 que vamos fazer uma COP em um país que não é petroleiro, né? 70% das emissões são do petróleo. Falamos muitas vezes dos problemas da pecuária, do arroz, da agricultura em geral, de muitas cadeias, mas a verdade é que nós temos também que trabalhar em ajudar a outros sectores que não são o setor da agricultura, porque esse é um dos poucos sectores que podem sequestrar carbono no solo, né? Esse sequestro de carbono que melhora os solos, que melhora a microbiologia, que melhora a fertilidade. E acho que essa definição estratégica que o Brasil tem frente ao mundo, essa nova lei de biocombustíveis que incrementa fortemente o corte de álcool e de diésel e fomenta outros bios em outras indústrias, é uma mostra muito forte da unidade do sector agrícola, dos resultados que o sector agrícola está dando, não só para o sector agrícola, sino também para o país todo, ¿no? Para o resto das indústrias. E acho que tem muitos estudos, artículos, que demonstram que essa suposta competência entre os alimentos e a energia é uma competência que a inovação, aqui temos o pessoal de Embrapa, é uma competência que acho vai ficar antiga em muito pouco tempo. Acho que a inovação e a recuperação e o crescimento das áreas vão dar uma resposta muito forte para o mundo todo. Quero ser muito cuidadoso com isto, mas nós temos um discurso muito nobre de cuidar nosso ambiente. Acho que todos os produtores rurais cuidam suas fazendas, cuidam seus campos, cuidam seus cultivos. Isso é uma coisa que nós temos que defender muito fortemente, porque às vezes a nobre questão ambiental e alguns discursos podem se transformar em barreiras que não necessariamente têm que ver com o ambiental, sino que têm que ver com o comercial. E nossa região está sofrendo crescentemente desses problemas. Eu sou diretor regional do ICA e estou o tempo todo viajando por Chile, por Argentina, por Paraguai, por Uruguai. E acho que temos que estar muito mais perto dos países para ter maiores definições, para estar mais perto, para poder ter uma opinião comum frente a alguns embates de outros blocos que, sem informação basada em ciência, geram problemas comerciais quando a questão ambiental é uma coisa muito séria, como falou Franchila, todos os produtores rurais estamos sofrendo cada vez mais as consequências das mudanças do clima. Acho que desenvolvimento, segurança alimentar, sequestro de carbono, são todas coisas que a agricultura hoje está dando ao mundo. Vamos a ter, está acabando a COP30, né? Porque todo este ano falamos o tempo todo da COP. Belém vai ser só o final. E agora temos que lograr que a próxima COP também seja em um país agrícola. Também continuemos com esta fala, por isso acho que essa proposta de Austrália de fazer a COP lá e que seja Brasil o presidente da COP durante todo o ano 2026, vai continuar sendo uma coisa politicamente muito forte nos ambientes multilaterais para continuar falando de nossa agricultura, de nosso continente, dos novos continentes, porque a verdade é que a América e a Oceania têm muito para explicar da segurança alimentar e energética mundial de hoje. E nós estamos muito comprometidos, como a Casa da Agricultura das Américas, em construir um olhar, uma visão, um olhar continental da importância de nossos sistemas alimentares e agricultura como parte da solução a nuestros problemas. Hoy tuve un almuerzo justamente con la embajadora de Australia y hablábamos de la importancia de también de tener alguna fala cada vez mayor y más vida al grupo de Cairns, ¿no? Eu queria agradecer também a presença de muitos parceiros aqui. Em primeiro lugar, a secretária Júlia, muito obrigado por estar aqui. Também a todo o time da Bayer, né? Catalina, Pedro, a Patrícia e Felipe, que tiveram muito trabalho aqui também, a Demetrius, a presença de Embrapa, do Ministério da Agricultura, do Ministério de Minas e Energias, a Corp Life, a Abramilio, a Brasem também e todo o time do ICA. Muito obrigado.
Okay, thank you very much, Gabrielle, for hosting us today. For the interview portion of tonight's program, I'm delighted to welcome to the stage two representatives from Brazil's Ministry of Development, Industry, Trade, and Services. Please join me in welcoming Pedro Guerra, the Chief of Staff to the Vice President, and Julia Cruz, the Secretary for Green Economy, Decarbonization, and Bioindustry. We will also be taking questions from the audience at the end of tonight's program, so please use the posted QR codes and share your questions for our speakers. Pedro, Julia, thank you both for joining me today for this conversation. Let's start with the first question, and Pedro, I'll come to you first. Vice President Acme has pledged that Brazil will be a great global leader in decarbonization. Can you tell me where biofuels fits into the broader strategy around climate and decarbonization policy?
Should I speak in English or we switch to Portuguese? What is better? I think English is better, okay. So I would highlight that decarbonization is a transversal mission in the whole industrial policy nowadays. We have 6 missions, one of it, and Julia will tell more deeper about that with much more property with her team. But this is the basis of the idea. But more specifically, I think that the government as a whole has very clear that we should explore our installed capacities. So we have a long time experience in biofuels, from RenovaBio a couple of years ago to the initial policies in the first Lula government. We try to stimulate the sector both in fostering the family farming, in providing the oils and the technologies for the development of these new fuels, and the issuance of certificates, creating a new market for it. So I think that after many years of this experience, both in terms of policies and the creation of market itself, it was very clear that we have all the conditions to move on. So the first measure basically was to approve a bill, the Future of Fuels Law, that was passed last year, and create a predictability for the entrepreneurs in terms of percentage of addition of fuels in their vehicles. So this was key for the development of the sector, not only in the biodiesel industry, but also in the ethanol sector as well. And we are trying to move on in this direction. So with one single policy, after years of experience, I think that we realized that our bet in the biofuels is key, both for taking profit of our installed capacities, taking profit of our natural advantages, benefiting the local communities, and creating an innovation environment that could benefit the economy as a whole, either for domestic consumption or even to export. So I think that it was not something that we set up of the sudden. It was a long-term learning, but it is very consistent, and it's proven to be very efficient for reducing our carbon emissions.
And Julia, I want to talk more about where Brazil has been when it comes to biofuels, particularly Renova Bio, which you mentioned was implemented about 8 years ago now. What evidence have we seen that it is working, that it is delivering sort of the innovation around biofuel production that was promised?
Thank you very much, Stephen. First, let me also thank our host, Gabriel, for having us here for this very important conversation. And I think it's important also for perhaps the international audience to take a step back and remind the audience that's here in Brazil, but also our international viewers, that Brazil has a very long tradition in biofuels. We are perhaps the sole country, the only country in the world who has already transitioned away from fossil fuels, and this comes since the 70s, when the government took a strategic decision to promote biofuels as a form of security, as an inducer of development. And so we have biotechnology, we have our Embrapa representatives here who led that transition, and we have kept adding to that strategy for the past 5 decades now. So Renova Bio is another stepping stone, let's say, in a long tradition. But how can we move forward? Like Pedro said before me, Renova Bio is an innovation in the sense that it brings market-based characteristics to the biofuel marketplace, and it enables companies to trade credits for sustainable biofuel production. I think we can move forward in this policy because although it works greatly for big producers, we can still take further steps to make it work also for medium and small producers and producers. And that's very important because biofuel, in addition to all the decarbonization advantages that it presents, so let me just add that it's very hard to decarbonize without biofuels because about a quarter, I use my cheat sheet, about a quarter of global energy-related greenhouse gas emissions come from the transport sector, and biofuels emit 90% less than fossil fuels. So if we're talking about a quarter of global emissions and a technology that can reduce that by 90%, we cannot pass upon this solution. We cannot pass upon this opportunity. So biofuels are essential for decarbonizing. But biofuels are also important to Brazil and to the world because it can help reducing regional inequalities and reducing inequalities in terms of the size of the producers. Why? Because when you're talking fossil fuel production, you are talking about big refineries. And when you're talking biofuels, you can have a small agro-producer that has on his or her farm a small refinery. We have technologies that can put a refinery at the size of a truck. And they can use the part of their production that's not ready to go to market because it's, I don't know, scraps or things that are not useful, and use that to produce biofuel. That means that you can have development all over Brazil, all over the world, and also for small producers. So I think that Renova Bio can take further steps to reach that kind of public. a public that it's not perhaps as easily adaptable to complex market strategies, but that could be integrated and therefore benefit both the climate and the regional equality within Brazil and also outside.
I'm interested then, and I'll come to you first here, Pedro, to get to that future that Julie is describing. What investment is needed? Because if you do have sort of decentralized production, it would seem to me investments in the future in biofuels may look different from what we've seen in the past.
Well, I think that there is no single answer for it, but it's a good bet believing in biofuels, especially in a country like Brazil. But more broader, I would say that the next step, as Julia was saying, is both the sophistication of our policy, the next steps of the policy itself, but also our capacity to mobilize other countries to move on in the same direction. So, in the last years, we witnessed some faith in the idea that electrical vehicles will be the winners of this technological run, let's put it this way. But there is no single answer again. We have different technological routes combined, taking profit of different realities. So for Brazil, for instance, is much more intelligent, and we have an expression for it, from cradle to grave. The emission is much lower if you use a vehicle based on biofuels. So this is the first point. So you have a good environment, you have the proper consumption, you have the preference of the consumers very adherent to this technology. Another point, you have the whole institutional, the whole ecosystem of financing in Brazil engaged with this agenda. So you have National Development Bank, you have regional development banks, you have Banco do Brasil, you have many official institutions devoted in lending money for this sort of project. You have another partners, and I would quote the US is the most obvious in this agenda, very engaged as well, especially for sustainable aviation fuel, but also initially in other routes. So you have the enthusiasm of the private sector on the one hand, you have the institutionality on the other hand, and you have the consumer very familiarized with the technology itself. So the predictability, the rentability, the efficiency of the model works, it proved work.
You know, I want to dig into Brazil's ambitions on biofuels a bit more, because when you look at the targets that have been set in President Lula's Future of Fuel law, they're very bold, right? Especially compared to other countries. I mean, to talk about some of the numbers, by 2030, increase the ethanol blending to about 35%, biodiesel looking at 20%. Julia, what gives you confidence that those goals can be achieved, particularly without compromising or disrupting food markets?
Because we are already doing it. We are very far in the implementation of that strategy, and Brazil has a lot of land availability. I think it's, again, important to remind the international audience that Brazil is not only a country of continental dimensions, but also we have about 28 million hectares, if that's the right word in English, of degraded land. What that means is that there is territory in the size of the United Kingdom that's just from land that's not being used because it has been degraded and that could become productive again. And that's not just a hypothesis. The Finance Ministry conducted an auction, a public auction to help investors invest on the recuperation of those lands. And we have mobilized 30 billion reais, which would be $5 billion by today's exchange rate, more or less, just to invest in the recuperation of that land. So I'm very comfortable in saying that it's possible to produce biofuels in Brazil without compromising one single meter of forest or one single meter of food production, because we can do it. We have land and we have the technical capabilities of doing so. In addition to that, we have technology being developed right now. So you cited macaúba. That's a great technological route. That's, for those who don't know, macaúba is a plant that is used in SAF production, also sustainable aviation fuel, and that has been proven to be very efficient. And we also have other developments. So it's not biofuel, but I can't resist to talk about this because it's very cool. In the Amazon, there is a center for biotechnology that's under our ministry, and they are developing a technology that's based on a plant that's kind of like a pineapple, but it produces fiber, plant-based fiber. And this fiber can be used to produce fabric, but also like bioplastics. Using biotechnology, we have made the productivity of this plant 100 times more efficient. That I mean, you could create from one plant, you could create 7 plants in 6 months. Now you can create 700. So that's biotechnology increasing productivity at a very fast speed. And that's not used for biofuels, but it's used for bioplastics. And the developments in macaúba are doing something similar for sustainable aviation fuel. So that's another area where we can go even further than we are already doing right now.
Let me ask you just a quick follow-up question on that, because there are still some environmental scientists who raise concerns that biofuels and how they're produced, we may be undercounting the impact on the climate, right? We may be not fully considering deforestation or impacts on biodiversity. So when you hear those concerns or those criticisms, how do you respond?
Of course, we have a lot to do in terms of deforestation. When we think about Brazil climate goals, they are mostly based in reducing and cutting back deforestation. That's where most of our emissions come from. So I understand where the concern comes from, and it has to be taken seriously. But also, we cannot take a reality that's not ours, of land scarcity, and use that as a parameter. And so, just to be very clear, deforestation is a problem. We are cutting back our emissions that come from that, but we do not need to cut our forests down to go through the biofuel production route. We can do both at the same time.
I want to come to you, Pedro, because obviously Brazil's ambitions don't exist in a vacuum, right? You have to engage with other countries, and particularly when it comes to trade. I wonder, do you hear from trade partners of Brazil? Do they express concerns, particularly those who depend on Brazilian exports of corn? You're the second largest exporter of corn in the world. Do you hear from trade partners who are concerned about the future availability? Oh.
No, to be very frank, I never heard of it. And as Julia said, of course, deforestation is an issue. It's our Achilles heel, in a sense. The land use and how we avoid illegal deforestation is our top priority in the environmental agenda, I would say. But Brazil increased so deeply its productivity in the last decades that it simply doesn't make sense. Brazil was 3 or maybe 4 decades ago a net importer of food, and it became dramatically a great exporter of food. thanks to what? To the capacity of having 2 harvests per year. So there is no miracle. It was technology, and thanks to Embrapa and the devotion of many farmers that took the decision to occupy as well regions in the country that were unexplored. So I think that the numbers show this very, very well. And on the one hand, you have the capacity to keep improving the productivity, to integrate systems, crop, livestock, forestry. And the other hand, you have a decreasing, and it's not news for anyone here, that the decreasing of birth ratio, the birth rate, is a reality all over the world. So all in all, I think that we are very well positioned to conciliate this, the production of energy and the production of food as well. We are having year after year, we are breaking records of production, of exports, and so on. And Brazil is very well positioned. It should keep partnering with countries with the same dimension and same mindset, and again, take profit of what technology and what resource could help in this direction.
Do you see a future where that could change? Because harvests are variable, right? You can have a record year one year and a difficult harvest the next. I mean, is there confidence that this is a long-term strategy, that long-term food and fuel can coexist?
I believe when you take into account countries like India, that has a family farm based production, or Indonesia and countries from the Southeast Asia, the horizon ahead is gigantic. You know, the capacity to improve productivity of these areas is gigantic. The same goes for Africa. So if we partner with countries and enter into trilateral agreements, bilateral strategies, and so on in these new fronts, I think that we are very, very well positioned to conciliate that.
I do want to ask, and I'll come to whoever wants to take this question, about the trade relationship with the U.S. in particular. Of course, being from the U.S. myself, and given our trade policies, there's a lot of change that's happening. You know, Brazil and the U.S. are the world's 2 largest biofuel producers. Both are part of the Global Alliance for Biofuels. But there are trade tensions here, right? Including right now an investigation into whether Brazil is unfairly treating U.S. ethanol producers, for instance. I wonder how you respond to those concerns, those criticisms, and what changes you would like to see in terms of the trade relationship with the U.S. when it comes to biofuels in particular.
Perfect. I'm gonna hand back the mic to Pedro, who is personally in those tables. But I just want to make a small point before that, because it's very important, as the US is sort of retreating from a leadership position in the climate space, to understand that the relative importance of Brazil increases. Not only because we are a big country with a big economy and a big impact on climate, but also because we are a leader within the Global South, because we're hosting COP, of course, and because we have the capacity to make a big impact within the emission targets. So our relative importance in the table increases, and we take that role very seriously. We are very cognizant of the responsibility that this entails. But with the US-Brazil trade relationship, Pedro can talk more properly.
No, very, very quickly. I would say that, well, there are 2 ways to look to this doubts ahead. The first one is what I call the zoom in. When you look to the zoo wind. Of course, there are tensions. You have producers in the Northeast that are very concerned with the impact for sugar, especially for sugar. They have a historical quota in the US market. Brazil export tons of sugar for the US since the 60s. And at the same time, you have a highly productive area in the center of the country, in the south, and so on. And this is where the agribusiness now is consolidated. But you can also do the zoom out movement. And for me, this is much more optimistic. And I really like seeing the opportunities from this point of view, which is basically the following. You should enter into a partnership with a country like the US, thinking both economically, socially, environmentally. We have great producers, we have that are very vocal from a political perspective in the two countries. Moreover, you have similar technologies. Of course, the US explores much more corn production, and Brazil is much more focused on sugarcane, although we are moving very quickly to corn and more recently to wheat as well. But we can partner. I strongly believe that we can partner, and more than this, we could create a global market for these new technologies. And in an institutional aspect, I think that the creation of proper agents that was announced still in the Biden administration is very interesting. A place that you could share information, a place that you can coordinate positions, and a place that you can negotiate rules and patterns for the countries to produce, to finance, to create a more friendly environment for these technological routes. So, answer directly the question, yes, we have in the short-term perspective a challenge ahead. We are negotiating, we are trying to find areas of cooperation, but at the same time, this is a fantastic opportunity for us to find areas that we're not traditionally used or mobilized in our historical partnerships.
Is part of your biofuel strategy energy independence? You know, I believe I read the Vice President make comments about not wanting to or potentially avoiding importing diesel, as much diesel from the US, for instance, if you have more biofuel sources. Is that one of the objectives of Brazil's policy?
I don't know what Julia thinks, but I like very much what a very smart guy and very an expert of the theme wrote the other day, Daniel Yergin, in the Foreign Affairs. He was saying that more than energy transition, we are witnessing an energy addition. So I strongly believe that it's true what he told, in the sense that, well, you have a variety, you have a menu of technological routes, and the world is a complex place. You need to learn to navigate these different scenarios where you have wars in Europe and the Middle East, you have inflationary pressures domestically, you have installed capacities, you have these emerging technologies. So how to conciliate all of this? It would be fantastic to move in a single line and not having to adapt. But the international reality is much more complex. So I agree. I think that what the Vice President says is, well, it's good for the country, reducing its external dependence on some issue. And the same goes for fertilizers that Bayer is engaged in. But we are not in a position nowadays to abandon a given route and simply choose another one. I think in the long term, and taking our international commitments, it's very clear that we have a given capacity, a given advantage in some sectors, but we need to embrace the different times and need to embrace the different routes and how they fit the necessities of the country in these different periods of time.
I want to ask about another important trade relationship, and that's with the European Union. You know, right now, Brazil has been pushing very hard for the Mercosur EU free trade agreement. If that does go into effect, there are concerns some European nations have expressed about whether Brazil will be able to comply with anti-deforestation regulations, some of the other environmental commitments that would be required as part of that trade agreement. I wonder, can you talk sort of practically speaking, if that agreement does go into effect, if there are new regulations, there are new markets for Brazilian exports, what impact does that have on your biofuel strategy?
Yes, definitely. It's going into effect. We're very confident that we're reaching the final steps of negotiation. And I think it brings, of course, advantages in terms of opening markets for Brazilian products and for Europeans as well. It's a bilateral relation. But also, it's, I think, bringing into focus this geopolitical context that Pedro was just talking about. Producing in Brazil can also be seen as a security guarantee for Europeans, for Americans, because the geopolitics of the world is very unstable right now. I don't need to explain that to anyone. We don't know how all the different players are gonna react to the different forces that are moving right now. And Brazil is stable. We are a peaceful country. We've had a peaceful relationship with Europe, with the US for basically since Brazil was created. And here we can produce with a clean matrix, our electric matrix. We didn't talk much about other forms of energy right now, but when we talk about electricity, our matrix is 88% clean. We also have the biofuels, of course, and producing in Brazil benefits not only Brazilian producers, but is a security guarantee for Europeans that they're gonna keep having steel coming, and it's gonna be green steel in addition to that because our matrix is clean. So it's beneficial for both parties.
Did you have anything you want to add, Pedro, in terms of looking ahead on the trade relationship with the EU? If that does expand, you know, the imports of European autos, for instance, does that have an impact on how Brazil thinks about biofuels going forward?
I see the European Mercosur agreement that is on the table, and we are very optimistic about the approval of it. Not only is a trade agreement, and this is the more obvious dimension of the partnership, but also as a market creation, in the sense that, of course, you have these new regulations that were all incorporated in the text. So from intellectual property to label rights, passing from sustainability goals to competition guidelines. So it's a very complex, very broad agreement, and it's an agreement that creates a potential corridor of economic integration. As Julia said, I think that given the pressures that are now affecting especially the continental Europe nowadays, the difficulty to assess energy source, the commitments in the light of Paris Agreement, and the social pressures that affect the countries in Europe, it's very proper. It's very adequate to believe that we could industrialize the region. We could move some companies, as it's already happening. The other day we're an important investment of Bosch in São Paulo, for instance. A part of the research and the innovation center of Bosch in the global level was moved to Campinas. So this is just one example, but we are witnessing many examples of this nature nowadays. So believing that we could be a safe place, a place that you can test new technologies and benefit from clean energy is very important for us to use the agreement not only in commercial, in trade terms, but also in a much more strategic point of view.
I want to bring in an audience question. This one is about the notice of restoration of degraded lands. The question is, how can companies in the biofuel sector participate, and what are the benefits?
So, as I mentioned, we just had an auction by our finance ministry to bring in financing, both national and international blended, for those that are interested in investing in that space. But there's also space for direct investment by companies if they want to produce using that strategy, but also if they want to offset their emissions. We do have a voluntary carbon market, and we also passed a law to create the Brazilian regulated carbon market so that the companies may invest in recuperating degraded lands, not only for ethical reasons or for, one may say, for communication reasons, but also they may benefit financially once our carbon markets are up and running.
Another question here about sustainable aviation fuels, which I know is an area of investment and interest. What role do you think Brazil has to play in the decarbonization of the aviation sector?
So I heard from a friend that it's very difficult to decarbonize the aviation sector. So unless you focus on the fuel itself, you will not do much improvements in the performance of the sector in this dimension. So taking this into account, I think that Brazil is very, very advanced, very well positioned, both in the forging of new technological routes, as Julia told with the example of Macaúba, which is being developed in Minas Gerais, and it's a very oily seed that is very efficient for this purpose, but also in chemical and physical process that could decarbonize the molecules, could create a much more efficient fuel based on what is traditionally a fossil fuel. So there are many technological routes being exploited nowadays. Petrobras is very engaged in this agenda. The National Development Bank as well just published a call for new projects to give some resource and enter into partnership with new companies. So today we have this combination of different levels of maturity of projects. Some are much more mature, and the others are still in the scratch. You know, you are trying to see which one is going to be the more efficient route, which seed, which place in the country, which sort of combination of partnership should we have the government in the first place, or should we just give a specific incentive for the industry to emerge? So the time is not very favorable because we have the Corsia goals for 2027. So we need to hurry in this aspect. But Brazil could give a fantastic example in this area, and seen very good examples all over the country in the same direction.
My last question for you both, and thank you so much for your time tonight. In just a few weeks, many of us will be headed to Belém for COP30. I'm curious, what will you be looking for from other countries when it comes to Brazil's biofuel strategy? And as you're speaking with other countries, do you think that Brazil's balance of food and fuel is a model that others will be able to replicate?
First of all, thank you so much for having us in this conversation. It was great. In terms of what I expect from Belém, the presidency of COP has talked a lot about how this is a COP of implementation. How we want not only all countries, but also all companies, all NGOs, all social movements, all people that are going there to have an implementation mindset. So I really look forward to seeing how this exchange of practices, experiences, policy ideas can become new projects of implementing climate targets. And I think that if we come out of Belém with new partnerships being forged, with open minds about biofuel, I'm pretty confident that Brazil's experience can inspire others, that we can get out of there with concrete partnerships, concrete financing, and perhaps different policy frameworks that can help us achieve climate goals.
Pedro, from you, what would you like to come out of Belém with?
Well, again, thank you all for your time, and thank you very much for the invitation. It's an honor to be here. Thank you, Bayer, ICA, and all the partners here and colleagues from the government as well. I'm very confident that we can find niches of cooperation with countries that are trying to find new models of development. So it's not to say that we should be closed to other countries, that we should ignore what developed countries create. On the contrary, we should use critically what these countries has to offer to us, but use wisely our capacities, our natural resource, the conditions of our countries. Brazil has this large experience in biofuels, in ethanol, thanks to the oil shock in the 70s. It was a little bit traumatic, and the country learned to diversify its energy grid thanks to this sort of experience. I think that the Europeans are, for instance, are having this harmful lesson nowadays. So the important, and this is a first message, I believe, the important thing is to diversify. You need to manage your risk and diversify what you have at your disposal at a timely basis with a confident partner. And this I have in mind the very quoted idea of nearshoring, for instance. Secondly, I think that we really need to think that, okay, we should find our way to create new technologies, and less developing countries also want the same thing. It doesn't make sense to simply export things to Africa, for instance, or to some countries in Asia. We need to construct partnerships that are win-win partnerships, really win-win partnerships that transform the reality of communities, create income, create jobs, transfer technologies, and in the end of the day, create the sustainability of the whole process. So Brazil has a good experience in this aspect, trying to export its technical capacities, especially on tropical agriculture. And the same for me goes to fuels and biofuels, which is another chapter in this fantastic history of Brazilian agribusiness.
Well, listen, I want to thank you both for your time and your insights. Thank you all for being here, and to Bayer for being our partner on this program. I hope you have a wonderful evening.